You don't need a luxury kitchen to prepare gourmet meals. I wanted a little on the sticky side. With a modest kitchen and some standard equipment, you can cook food that you would be proud to serve. There is my shrimp. All you need is a few helpful kitchen techniques, the ability to follow a recipe, a passion for food, and a fascination with cooking. Just follow along the rib cage. That is so good. My name is Dennis. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. Today the temperature outside is supposed to be relatively cool compared to most of the week, so I thought it would be a good day for baking. And as I am out of bread, I thought this would be a good time to bake some bread. I haven't done whole wheat bread before. And the thing with bread making is that there are so many different types of bread that, well, I've seen Paul Hollywood do it. On the BBC, Paul Hollywood did an entire TV series just on bread. There's so much variety out there. So what I want to do today is the whole wheat bread that I like to make. And then if there's time, I'll use it for a sandwich at the end. So let's bake bread. I have here 1 pound 454 grams of all-purpose flour. And then I have 1 pound 454 grams of whole wheat flour. And then what I have here is 3 tablespoons of Vital wheat gluten. This will increase the protein. Vital wheat gluten is a product that I'm seeing a lot more in the grocery stores these days. I used to have to drive all the way down in the city to buy this, but now they sell it in the local grocery store. It's wheat protein, and what happens with bread making is the proteins, there's 2 proteins supposedly in the flour that when you knead and work the dough, you link up these proteins, and they link up to form these gluten chains, and that's what gives the bread dough its elasticity. The more elasticity in the dough, the more air it'll hold when the yeast is fermenting the starches and the sugars inside the bread dough, and that'll give you a higher rise and a lighter, less dense loaf. And now I need to just combine these 3 together very simply. Not much is required here. Next I want to combine my liquids. What I have here is, it's still frozen, is I have potato water. What I do is when I make a lot of potatoes, like for example, there are times when I'll cook 20 pounds of potatoes and then I'll portion the potatoes up as mashed potatoes, put them in the freezer, and I have portions of mashed potatoes for my Lazy Man meals. If you want to know more about Lazy Man meals, I have a whole page on my Lazy Man meals on my website, whitetrashcooking.com. So this is potato water saved from boiling potatoes. I put it in 1 cup containers, freeze it, and then pop them out of the containers and store them in Ziploc bags. That's why you still see this frozen. It'll add more starch to the bread dough, and I get a softer texture to the bread. It's more tender. I like that effect. This is, oh, and that's 1 cup, right? So that's 1 cup, which is 237 milliliters. This is 12 ounces, 355 milliliters of beer. If you wanted to, you could use 1.5 cups, 355 milliliters of water. I like to use beer, and you'll see this won't foam much because I decanted this earlier back and forth to get all the foam out of it. So that's flat beer. It doesn't have to be flat, but if it doesn't foam up and spill over, it makes it a lot easier to work with in a video. I like to use beer because I think it gives the bread a better flavor, and the only way I can describe it is it gives the bread a more breadier flavor. It makes it taste more like bread. And then finally I'm going to add to this 1/4 of a cup, 60 milliliters of water. And that should be all the moisture I need. Now I need to heat this up in the microwave. For one, I need to melt this block of ice. But I want to get this up to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius. That's a good temperature at which to activate the yeast. So there is my warm liquid from the microwave. My thermometer here says it's 108, 109 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's perfect. I'm going to put that in my mixer bowl. I transfer the flour to a larger container to hold it. And then I want to put, this is 1 tablespoon of yeast. You can use instant or active dry. It's not going to matter for this because we're going to proof the yeast anyways. And then I have 1 tablespoon of sugar. And I want to combine these ingredients to dissolve that sugar and the yeast. And then here is my flour. I'm going to put in maybe half of this flour, scoop at a time here, to make what's called a sponge. That's a wet, it's like a batter. Combine all this together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit now for about 10 minutes. But what I should see after about 10 minutes is if the yeast is going, little bubbles will start forming on the surface. That means my yeast is alive and vital. So I have moved my bowl to my stand mixer. I have fitted my dough hook in place. I have my flour here. And I'm going to start adding flour to this, incorporating it until I have all my flour in there, and then I'm going to check the consistency. Oh, and I have some salt here on the side as well. This is 2 teaspoons of salt that I'll be adding in there at the same time with the flour. All my flour has now been incorporated into my dough. It isn't kneaded yet. It's not smooth. But this is the point at which I start judging, should I add more flour or should I add more liquid? My original recipe says to add possibly 2 or 3 more tablespoons of water. What I like to see is a dough that sticks to the bottom of the bowl a little bit but pulls away from the side of the bowl. That's usually a good indicator to me that I have a dough that's moist enough to give me a light bread. I added 2 tablespoons of water. I'm starting to get the stickiness that I like to see. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this at number 2 on my stand mixer, and then I'm going to knead this for about 10-15 minutes. Okay, that finishes my kneading. I'm going to get that out of the way. This is a nice soft texture, a little bit sticky, which is where I want it. The next thing I want to do is work some butter into the dough. So I'm going to cut a hole into the dough and put maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of room temperature butter inside that dough. Close the dough over the top, not that it's going to make much difference. And what's going to happen is I knead this in, because butter and water do not mix, my dough is going to break up and it's going to look awful. It's going to look like disaster has struck. Don't panic. Let it continue to knead, and as it works that butter into the dough, it'll bring it all back together again. It'll be a nice smooth dough ball again. So now there is my dough. That's finished kneading. It has all come back together again. Texture of that is so nice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dough out of the bowl, set it aside. I'm going to wash that bowl, clean that all out, and I'm going to use that for letting the dough rise. Before I put my dough into my bowl, I want to butter it well on the inside. I'm using my bare fingers rather than a piece of plastic bag or something because I want to get the butter on my hands, but not on the sleeve of my brand new shirt. That way, by having butter on my hand, when I lift my dough up, it won't stick to my hand. Then finally, I want to butter the top of that dough. Just lightly. Because as this rises up, I don't want it to stick to the underside of the plastic wrap that I'm going to use to cover this bowl. There we go. That's beautiful. And I like the texture of that. It feels soft, it feels pillowy, it feels moist. It's got a really nice texture to it. That is going to make a beautiful bread. Okay, I've got to wash my hand here, cover this with plastic wrap, put this in a warm place, and let this rise until it's doubled in bulk. It's going to take at least an hour, could be an hour and a half, or longer, depending on how cool my kitchen is. I want to see that dough just doming up over the top rim of my bowl. How's that for dough rising up over the rim of the bowl? I'm going to take this off, punch this down, deflate it, put it on my cutting board. Now I'm going to divide this in half and make 2 loaves to fit into my bread pans, which I will show you in a moment. Set that one aside to make my loaves. Flatten it down into a rectangle and then start bringing it together and pinching it together. Like so, and then do that again. And pinching it together. This will be the underside. This will be the bottom of each loaf. And what I'm doing by doing that, pressing it down, pulling it up, and pinching it together, is I'm stretching this top part so that I have a smooth top. Okay, now I want to show you my bread pans because I have issues with my bread pans. The problem with my bread pans is that they're not deep enough. These walls don't come up high enough. So what happens is as my bread expands, it balloons out over the top, and I get that muffin top, which is okay. It looks great, but it makes the bread too wide to go into my toaster. And I make my bread primarily to toast. I use it almost exclusively for toasting unless I'm making a sandwich with it. So I made these metal walls. It's weird, I know, but it's a guy thing, for my bread pans so that I don't care if they balloon this way, but I can't get that muffin top. So now I'm going to put my loaf, and I lined this with parchment paper as well, because that makes it easier to lift the bread out after it's baked. So there's my loaf now in there. I'm going to shape my other loaf, put that in my other bread pan, cover these with plastic, and let them rise again for about 45 minutes. If I didn't say how long this dough rose initially in that bowl, it was just over an hour. It was like an hour and 10 minutes. My loaves now have risen. I can pull my plastic off. These rose for just under an hour. I don't need these binder clips on there. And for that matter, I don't need these wire things either. Okay, so now in the meantime, I have heated my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 191 degrees Celsius. And I'm going to cut a slit in the top of each loaf. This will give me a little bit more room for expansion of my loaves. You need obviously a really sharp knife for this. Some people use a razor blade. I keep a very sharp edge on my knives. Okay. What will happen when these go into the oven, they go through what's called an oven spring. For the first 10 minutes, they'll expand rapidly. Then once the outside of the loaf starts to harden, as it starts to cook and crispen up, then you won't get any rising. But because of this slit, that'll allow me some space for that oven spring, and it'll give me a higher, loftier loaf. Okay, so these are now ready to go into the oven. As far as the total baking time on those loaves, when I write the recipe and put it on my website, I'll say 35 to 45 minutes. What works best for me, the way my oven works, I usually find in 40 minutes the loaves are done. Here are my bread loaves, fresh from the oven. And what I want to do, see if I can do this. This is why I like this paper. I can lift the loaf right out by the paper. Set that aside. Beautiful. Look at that. Beautiful. And there they are, 2 loaves of freshly made whole wheat bread. Now I have to wait for these to cool, and then I can cut into them to see how they taste. I want to use my whole wheat bread for making sandwiches, but the first thing I need to do is make some mayonnaise. I used to do this all the time, many, many years ago, but then mayonnaise, because it contained egg yolks, was evil for a while, and now they're saying eggs aren't as evil after all. So I'm back to making my own mayonnaise. I got this recipe many, many years ago off the radio. KNX out of Los Angeles every morning had a food hour with Chef Jackie Olden. She would start her show by saying, "Come on into the kitchen." And this was one of her recipes, and I tweaked a few of the ingredients over the years, but this is an easy way to make your own mayonnaise. So let's make mayonnaise. I've got some water boiling in a pan. I'm going to turn my heat down now. And I've put my egg yolks in another pan, and I want to warm these up. But I want to be really, really careful. I want to bring these up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 60 degrees Celsius. I'm taking these off the heat. If I see too much thickening, I have to be careful because at 149 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 65 degrees Celsius, these will start to cook and turn into scrambled eggs. So I have my digital thermometer here, and I'm going to check my temperature. See how quickly this comes up to temperature? It's already 126. So this heats very rapidly. You don't want to scramble the eggs, you just want to heat them up to the point where okay, they're up there. Good. You just want to get them to the point where they're heated up. The probability of there being infection in those egg yolks is extremely low. I think the USDA says that about 1 in 30,000 eggs might have salmonella in it. But if you want to be careful, just bring them up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Celsius. And that'll help to eliminate bacteria if there's any present. Okay, I'll let these cool now, and then I'll be ready to start mixing the ingredients for my mayonnaise. I have my food processor set up here. And these are my egg yolks. Still in a liquid state. Good. And then into this, I'm adding 1 1/2 teaspoons of vinegar. I'm using 1 1/2 tablespoons, rather, of vinegar. I'm using tarragon vinegar. You could use rice vinegar if you wanted. And then I have 1/2 tablespoon of lemon juice. A scant tablespoon of soy sauce. This is maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more than 2 teaspoons here because that's kind of a dark soy sauce. And then this is 1/4 of a teaspoon of white pepper. Okay, I'm going to put my lid on there, and then you want to mix this up really well. Process it for about 1 minute. I mixed this up now for 1 minute. What I have here is 1 cup, 237 milliliters of corn oil. You can use other vegetable oil if you'd like. And then I have 3/4 of a cup, 177 milliliters of extra virgin olive oil. I'm going to very slowly drizzle each of these oils into my egg mixture, my egg yolk mixture. And that's what we call an emulsion. That will start to thicken. Oil and water-based stuff just doesn't mix. But if you mix it at a very high rate, it'll break up and form this emulsion. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Let's see what I got here. That is a mayonnaise. You can see how thick that is. My last step now is to transfer this to a jar. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? Homemade mayonnaise. Now you saw what flavorings I used in that mayonnaise. Tarragon vinegar, soy sauce, a little bit of Dijon mustard. You can adjust those. You can change those if you want. Maybe you want to use a rice wine vinegar or a white wine vinegar. You may want to use a little bit of cayenne pepper in there if you like it a little on the spicy side. When I was in New Zealand many years ago, I was told not to be surprised that the mayonnaise there is a little bit sweet. You could sweeten that up if that's how you like your mayonnaise. By making it yourself, you can adjust the flavorings and make it the way you like it. And then I do want to take a taste of that. See how that tastes. Oh, that's nice. It's got a good mayonnaise flavor to it, but see that tarragon vinegar adds an herbiness to it. That's got a really, really nice flavor. So now I can refrigerate that, and there is my homemade mayonnaise. My bread has cooled, but before I slice into it, I want to talk about something I want to do with this bread. I want to make a sandwich, but I've been thinking about BLTs. If you're not familiar with BLTs in your part of the world, I don't know where they're popular other than the United States. It's bacon, lettuce, and tomato. And I went onto the internet to look up classic BLT, and there was a lengthy, detailed explanation, step by step, on how to assemble a BLT. It's like a page and a half of instructions on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I got a kick out of it. But now what I was thinking is, rather than using bacon, and I love BLTs, but rather than using the bacon we have here, what if I were to use a little bit of pancetta, fried until it's crisp, and, because that doesn't have a lot of flavor to it, some fried prosciutto? What if I were to use those two together for the meat and use my mayonnaise, lettuce, and tomato, and then my whole wheat bread that I'm going to toast for this sandwich? So the first thing I need to do is fry up my prosciutto and my pancetta. I have a skillet heating on the stove here. Got some fat. I'm going to put some fat in this pan. doesn't need a lot because the meats are going to yield some fats. That, in case you're wondering, just happens to be duck fat. You don't need to do anything fancy. I happen to have duck fat in the refrigerator, left over from having roasted a duck. And you can see what happens to prosciutto. It shrivels up very quickly, which is okay. My prosciutto is done, so I'm going to do 3 slices of pancetta. Pancetta is very much like a bacon, but it doesn't have the hickory smoke flavoring that American bacons have. And the same thing, I'm going to cook this up until it's crisp. My bread has thoroughly cooled now. It's time to cut this open and see what it looks like inside. I'm going to cut in a little bit just to get off this end piece. Wow, look at the crumb in that. Isn't that beautiful? Nice homemade whole wheat bread. Now for my sandwich, I'm going to cut off 2 fairly generous slices here, and then I'm going to put these in the toaster. Okay, to make my sandwich here, I have my toast. This is my homemade mayonnaise. I haven't had this mayonnaise in years. I probably stopped making it 15, no, more than that, maybe 20 years ago. And let's see. I think I'm going to put a couple of slices of prosciutto on there rather than the 3, because these are so large. And then my pancetta. And then some freshly sliced tomato. I bought these at the store today. These happen to be Roma tomatoes. And then I have here some romaine lettuce that I cut the back rib out of, so that I could have that green leafy part. One more. I really like romaine. Excellent. And then one more time, spread some mayonnaise on my toast. And there is my BLT made with prosciutto, pancetta, lettuce and tomato, and my homemade mayonnaise. The last step is to see what that tastes like. There it is, my sandwich. I'm so hoping that this is going to taste good. Yeah. That tastes like a BLT to me, but that prosciutto and the pancetta just gives it, I think, a nicer flavor. So, and the homemade mayonnaise and my homemade whole wheat bread. So, excuse me, I'm going to go enjoy my sandwich. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.